Okay, so in this episode, we're going to talk about the OneDrive application within O365. And we're going to cover these 9 points. One, we're going to talk about how the OneDrive is different from SharePoint. For SharePoint architects and admins, developers, and the like, we understand the backend DNA of a OneDrive and how it's very similar to SharePoint. But we're going to talk about what some of those differences are and how it may differ from a SharePoint team site and document library. Number two, we're going to talk about the single document library, how it's centric to a single document library. Three, we're going to talk about the Sync client, which is probably one of the most powerful features of a OneDrive. Four, we're going to talk about the default library restrictions. And again, this is going to speak to the differences between the OneDrive and a standard document library in SharePoint. Left nav options, there's a bunch of left nav options available in OneDrive, so we'll touch on those. The SharePoint library connector, the old school share with everyone. It may be a difference on some of the capabilities and features you may see in the OneDrive depending on when it was provisioned. So luckily I was able to get one of the older ones so I can speak to some of the differences there. And then number 8 and 9 are actually more geared towards O365 or SharePoint admins. So those individuals who will have the SharePoint administrator role within O365. We'll talk about the secondary admin capability and how it's off by default and what does that mean. And then we also talk about the default privacy setting for OneDrive. Okay, let's go ahead and get started. So what we're looking at now, this is actually my test tenant, and I'm signed in into my OneDrive. I actually have 2 users. This is my Deshaun Clark, and I also have a Deshaun Clark 2 that I will be using to kind of help with some of these. I'm actually move this to my second screen just to make sure I hit all of the points. So when we look at the OneDrive, when you look at it in the scheme of things of other site collections within SharePoint, every employee within Active Directory or every user, I'll use the term employee very loosely, every user in Active Directory that gets synced up will have a OneDrive account, or every user who has an org account or a licensed account would have a OneDrive account based on the different licensing that you have. And obviously, if you use the app launcher, you hit OneDrive and you get access here. As soon as you land in OneDrive, it's going to feature that default document library, and the default document library is really just where it goes. It's not really meant to. And this is where Microsoft is really kind of scaling back. So if you look at this library, you don't have the option to, say, for example, create different views, right? So I think that's one of the differences there. You have this list and tile option you can toggle between, but you don't have the option to create additional site columns. And that may be by design. So even if you knew SharePoint pretty well and knew how to hack into like the back end, so say, for example, if you go to site settings, you say, oh, okay, this looks like site collections, site settings. I have all my other options like manage features, site collection features, and site collection admin capabilities and search, yada, yada, yada. And then you go to the gear icon, and you say, oh, now this looks familiar. I can go to site contents, and then this should give me access to all of my lists and libraries. And this is where the differences are really starting to show itself. So you go to new, you still have the option to do lists, libraries, apps, and subsites. But here, this is a document library that I created. Oh, it launched me in the quick launch. But this is a document library too. This is one that I've created from that list. And then this starts to feel like a standard library where I have the plus sign. I can create additional columns. I can have my all documents view. And then if I modify that, I can come in here and save view, either save it as a new view or save changes to this view. This really starts to feel like that. But this is not my default library. And then if I bounce back, let me just bounce back to the default library. So you see those options do not appear. And then you see the sharing column, which is very important because document libraries are meant for individuals. They're really meant to especially depends on how you position them, but they're really meant to, if you go an all-out cloud, for each individual, My Documents folder, especially with the new OneDrive Sync client, that's going to sync all of their files here to your local laptop or desktop or whatever machine that you have. It's really meant to be like the one-stop shop for individuals. So for all those licensed users or AD users that you have in your organization that will be given their own personal OneDrive, it's really meant for that. So privacy is really meant for that user and that user only. And then we were actually going to like some of the admin settings to where by default, not even the SharePoint admin, which normally would have global access to all the site collections within the SharePoint farm, will not have editing or read capabilities outside of what's explicitly granted to them through that individual user. So even from an admin perspective, even the tenant admin perspective, they will not have read access to these files unless they are, as indicated here, shared with. Now, I was talking about the old school and new school OneDrive. It's this folder here. So prior to, and then you can tell that this was created March 1, 2015. So I had this tenant for a while and has been going through some of those various updates. But the new OneDrive, so if I go in there now and add a named user and the OneDrive is provisioned for this particular tenant, they will not receive a shared with everyone folder. And now the shared with everyone folder by default was given access to everyone, I think everyone except external users. So so say for example, if I wanted to share this like test survey file, I'm sorry, I clicked on it too. So if I wanted to share this test survey file, now part of me says that I would just want to drag and drop that guy there. Okay, cool, that worked. So I know in the previous video, the drag and drop seemed like it wasn't going to work. So if I drag and drop everything to the share with everyone, anyone within the organization would see it. And now if you start looking at the Delve profile and all this other good stuff, so if I start emailing or interacting with someone on my team, or even anyone, across the organization in Delve with the Graph API feels that this file is relevant to them, it would show up in that person's Delve profile, or it would show up in that person's shared with me link within their OneDrive. So, so this was like explicitly shared. So as I mentioned before, depending on the date of when that OneDrive was provisioned, that user may or may not see these. And I know for like certain clients, just to kind of keep things in sync, they were really trying to get rid of this shared with everyone. Now, outside of that, by default, this default library is going to be locked down to where only the current user who's the site collection admin of this OneDrive would have access to it. Now, when I went to, let me pop back here. And then this is really kludgy, and I think it's kludgy by design. So you have to go to site settings, and from here I can go to site content unless I bookmark this URL. Now, if I go to this document library by default will be shared with everyone if I'm not mistaken. So let me try, let me see something that's, okay, let me just do this file here. Now this says modified by, but then if I go to share and then share with, everyone except external users by default are given access to this file. So when I created this document library, this second document library, it wasn't as if I had to go in there, create a document library, go into permissions and say, oh, break inheritance, and then explicitly grant everyone access to this document library. That's done by default. And I think that's just one of those things that you should be aware of, especially from an administrator, architect, or even from a governance standpoint. Just be aware of the behavior once the end user goes in here under this gear icon and site contents and start to create additional subsites, additional lists, or additional libraries, understanding what the default permission is going to be and how drastically different that is from the default permissions of the default library, which by default does not give everyone access. Okay, so I think from a permissioning standpoint, that's one of the things to keep in mind. Now, this document library, this OneDrive is going to be, hold up, where's my app launcher? This OneDrive, okay, there it is. Now, this document library within the OneDrive you do have a sync option. I'm not going to sync this one because this is my playground tenant, and I actually have a real tenant already syncing, and I don't want to create multiple syncs and kind of deal with that headache. But here, as you can see on my file system, this is the OneDrive folder, and it has my company name on there because this is my real company tenant here, and this is my personal OneDrive. And the way that I use this becomes my documents folder. Everything I do is within the confines of this OneDrive Sync folder here. And then as you can kind of see, as you get a red asterisk, and you can kind of drill down, and that red icon dictates that something within that structure, and just keep following the red dot, keep following the red dot. So it's going to tell me that one of these guys are not synced, and I'm not clear on which one it is, but I know for a fact that it has the OneDrive Sync client currently has an issue with, I didn't think it was underscore, but I know for a fact it has an issue with the pound sign being in the name or the folder name, or the file name or the folder name, or the percentage sign being in the file name or the folder name. So if you have a file that has a percentage sign within those names, then that file will not be synced. The OneDrive client kind of spits up on those special characters. Now there is supposed to be a fix. Now this is interesting. No, I didn't fix it. I fixed it for the folder name, but I did not fix it for these files. But then again, for these files, I was not getting the red icon. But let's see what happens. So site collection images. So hopefully this will sync now. Seems like the red icon is gone for that one, and now it's appearing in this one. I don't think it's the underscore. I mean, honestly, I don't know why that particular path is having an issue. But either way, I know that there are special characters within the file name and or file name and or folder name that has an issue with the sync client. And as of right now, I know that it's percentages and pound. I have to double check on the underscore. Now, the good news is that fix is already on Microsoft's roadmap. It's just a matter of time, a timing thing of when that fix will be available to where the sync client kind of can ignore those or kind of get around those. And it kind of makes sense, right? I mean, from a cloud perspective, the percentage and hashtag from a URL perspective really means something. So, that being part of the file name kind of throw off the URL piece of it. Now, as far as in the left navigation, let's just kind of move quickly here. You have recent, and obviously this is going to highlight any document that you've touched, either modified or created. It's going to be highlighted here. Shared with me, I actually have a test user, and this is interesting. Probably 10 minutes before this video, I used that test user and shared documents with, so I have two users. I have Deshaun and I have Deshaun 2. So we're looking at the OneDrive for Deshaun, and I shared documents with Deshaun 2. Then also in Deshaun 2, I shared documents with Deshaun, and those have not appeared here yet. So it seems like it is leveraging search, which would make sense to surface these documents. So now I think it's just a matter of the continual crawler, running through. I'm sure a full crawl is not required for that type of change. But I think for the continuous crawl to kind of execute and get up to date, which is kind of sort of unpredictable. In some cases, I've seen updates or changes within 10 to 15 minutes. In other times, I've seen changes take probably 30 to 45 minutes before you kind of see those updates. So, just one of those things. Anything that's going to be search driven, you're going to have that delay. Now, as far as Discover, this is powered by the Graph API versus search. And so there's going to be some artificial intelligence behind it. And really what it's trying to do, this says, hey, you were either working on this here as a sample document, so here you go, or you were interacting with someone who actually owns this document, and based on the Graph API and all of its different parameters and algorithm, is surfacing up this information. So this could be documents that I either created and modified, and or someone that I'm tightly connected with. I use that with double quotes, air quotes, tightly connected with, because what determines that you're tightly connected with is multiple data points, and that's part of the algorithm, the Graph API and over time it gets smarter, and then I'm sure Microsoft is tweaking that based on feedback that they're receiving. The recycle bin is just that. Anything that you trash will be here so you can recover. Now, the section here where it says SP Classroom LLC, and then all these links behind underneath that, these are actually sites or SharePoint sites that are outside of OneDrive. These are different sites or site collections that I have access to that I've been playing around with. And with this connector, what it allows you to do, and this is a fairly new feature, so depending on how your tenant is set up, this particular tenant is set up for first release. So if you have a production tenant set up for standard release, you may or may not receive this. I'm not sure where Microsoft is on the deployment or rollout of this feature. But basically, you can come in here. Actually, let me switch this back to list view. I actually prefer list view. And these are going to be folders within this document library. And then now I can interact with these files without linking out to or navigating to this particular site, which is super, super cool. So if I'm working in OneDrive and I'm, doing things in my personal drive, I can be working on that and then say, oh yeah, what about that team site or this project site? There was a technical design document or something like that. I can either come here and interact with that technical design document. I can also come in here and actually create a document right there within that project site's document library, all within the context of my OneDrive without navigating to that. I can also create folders. Now, the other thing I cannot do, and this kind of mimics the capabilities and restrictions of this default library within OneDrive, I cannot start to come up here and manipulate the views or modify the views or add additional columns or things along those lines. So those are some of the restrictions. Even within this view, I will not have access to. I will not have the capability to move or to change. Now, this move to seems to do just that. This is very similar. If I was in the actual document library within the site, I can move within folders within this document library, or create a new folder and then move files there. I'm not going to do that. The copy to, same feature and same functionality, which is a little bit different than if I was in my actual OneDrive, which is the files link here. And then if let's say, for example, I want to move this guy, let's say copy to, now I can actually browse to different SharePoint sites. So if I want to move this to that project site I was in, and then that test Deshaun 2, I can do a copy here, which is very, very cool. So it just copied that actual file from my OneDrive into that SharePoint site for that particular document library and folder as specified. And if I go to project 1, Deshaun 2, here's the file there. Now, if, well, you're in the same view, so how can I really tell? Let me get this go to site link here at the top. Oh, wow, look at this. It's going to use the same tab. Normally, it would pop a new tab, but that particular link stayed within the same tab. Interesting. Okay, so here's this guy moved here. So very, hands down, if you're familiar with 07, 2010, 2013, that's hands down so much easier than that content structure, select a file, copy, use that bird's eye view, browse, select a file, boom, 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 boom. So much easier. So, another win for Microsoft on that one. Congratulations, guys. Okay, what else? So we talked about the different left nav options. We talked about the SharePoint libraries. We talked about the old school share with everyone folder that really depended on the timing of when that OneDrive was provisioned, if you will not see that folder. Oh, okay, so now let's take a look at some of the security items. Now, we talked about the one security concern. I'm going to call it a concern because I think it's one of those things that, from a user perspective, it's not 100% clear that, when this OneDrive gets provisioned, I'm used to things being locked down, right? Only you. I'm used to that. So I'm adding folders. I'm doing my thing. I'm adding, subfolders and files and, going away, hammer away. And then all of a sudden, and hopefully this is a red flag, I had to jump through some hoops, site settings, site contents, create additional library, right? Site contents, come up here, create a new library or list.
not knowing, unbeknownst to me, that I'm creating a public to everyone except or external users. I'm creating a public file, a library, right, which is this guy here. And now if I upload anything to this guy, it's going to be visible to anyone within the company. So if I go, this is my Deshaun 2 here. So I'm in, this is Deshaun's 2 OneDrive. Let's see here. Let me go discover. Now it's not here yet, but possibly there's a high probability that it may pop up here. And I think that's one of the concerns, right? Because before it was like, okay, yeah, you're sharing that with everyone, but unless they kind of stumble across it because they use search and they happen to search on DC favicon, right? I think this search is just going to be from a OneDrive. But, you know, if I was like in a, you know, a global search here, let's see if this guy pops up. Let's test this out. So let me go to site. So test Deshaun. Let me do this guy. Let me do everything, right? So now this is going to search the entire tenant and only show results of things that I have access to. Let me do DC. And then again, you know, I just uploaded that guy, so I may have to give it, you know, well, here it is, right? So that DC favicon pops up. And this is because I searched on it, right? And that was sometimes the saving grace, right? It was one of those things where security was not really tightly managed. It was kind of ad hoc, right? Everyone just kind of doing their own thing. People who were not that familiar with security within SharePoint were just kind of doing stuff, not knowing that they were doing stuff wrong. Then you come in, you turn on search, then all of a sudden the things that you thought were locked down were all of a sudden exposed to the entire company. So you kind of have that. But this is, if I'm happening to search on something, this thing pops up, even though the person that's sharing it that doesn't realize that they're sharing it. That's one thing. But I think the real danger is when I go into my Delve profile, and this guy, wait, where's my Delve profile? Okay, where's my About Me? How come I don't have a Delve? Interesting. All right, so if I go here, get Delve apps. This is interesting. This looks different. I don't know why this looks different for this user. Maybe it's this user doesn't have an E1. This user has a SharePoint Online only. And I think the licensing, so the licensing is restricting this to a certain extent. But if I go to OneDrive, right, and I go to Discover, if for whatever reason the Graph API over time, now I think the Graph API compared to like creating the index for search is going to be a little bit, the latency I think is a lot longer there. Only probably because it has to work through algorithms and its data points and all this other good stuff. So I'm gonna keep monitoring this, and I will see what happens. Like maybe in a day, come back to Discover and see if this guy pops up in my Discover or in my Delve. This is a Graph API, right? This Graph API Discover page, and see what happens. But I think that's the danger. That's a cautionary tale with that one, that things kind of get pushed out, right? Even though users are not searching for it. Okay, so real quick, as far as SharePoint administrators, if you go into the admin console and you go into the SharePoint Admin Center, your OneDrive settings, especially the default settings, are managed through the user profile. Now, if you're familiar with like 2010 and 07 and 2013, how the My Site, right, that was the old name for OneDrive, was connected to the user profile, that relationship still exists, right? So, you know, you have in your user profile, there's going to be a link to the OneDrive, and that determines for that particular user which URL they go to when they say, you know, OneDrive, because that's like a dynamic URL that's based on the current user. So that's still in play. those relationships are still there, and that's why you have to go into user profiles to manage. And here it's still got the old brand name, my site. So you just go to set up my site, and then within here you have several options. Personalization of site location. It seems like this is hard coded. There's no change there. You can change the naming convention, right? So you have those different options. You have the default read permission level. So if you wanted to lock this down to only certain users should have read access to everyone's OneDrive, by default, this is the security group that gets it. Everyone except external users. So that's one thing to be aware. If you need to change it, this is where you change it. The news feed, I'm not 100%. I think this is fading out because of the redesign of OneDrive. Email notifications, I think this is where you specify the from address when you need to. Now, my site cleanup, I think these two guys here are going to be pretty important depending on how you do your offboarding, or as people transition off, leaving the company. So by default, when you look at your org chart, right, that's kind of built in. I think that's user profile driven. The user that's in the managers group, they would gain access or ownership to their report to's OneDrive. Now, if a manager field is blank, either because AD is not updated or whatever happened that is not populated correctly, you can specify a default. Now, with both of these guys, when you specify the default, it's not going to retrofit existing OneDrives. So this is probably something to be aware of before you really start to roll this out, pretty widely within the company. So, but it's only going to affect the going forward. So if I set a secondary owner, it's not until after that setting that click save, and hopefully the timer job or something, whatever's in place, gets executed. Say, for example, I give it 20 minutes, provision of OneDrive, then that secondary owner kicks in. All the OneDrives that existed before this change are not affected. The same is true with the secondary admin. Now, the secondary admin, this is saying, okay, when this OneDrive gets provisioned, also make this user the secondary admin. As I'm mentioning before, even SharePoint admins do not have read access to things that are explicitly not given access to them by that user. So it actually locks them down. I think the one exception to that is the Compliance Center, only because auditing and compliance and legal holds and all this other good stuff needs access to these files in order to run its campaign or whatever it's looking for, its type of reporting. So that's going to be the exception of that. So it's just something to keep in mind, because I think even as writing PowerShell scripts, if you have to go in there and start to manipulate certain things will be locked down because it's not explicitly shared. It was actually one of those surprises. We kind of get around that for on-prem because we were then able to do like a full control or a read access at the web app level, right? But for O365, there's no web app layer in O365, which is, I think, the huge difference on why we were able to get away with some things on-prem that seems to be restricted or we can't do here. And then the privacy setting by default, I got to play around with this. So I'm going to check this and hit OK, and I'm actually go through and provision some more OneDrives and see how this is different. My guess is, based on reading on that setting, you can see how by default, when this OneDrive is provisioned and you get it into this default library, everything is locked down by default. And I think by checking that, when I provision new OneDrives, this probably will be open to everyone. So I'll double check. I'll report back and see how that actually worked out. Okay, so that's it for OneDrives. I think there was a lot going on the roadmap. I actually, unfortunately, did not check the roadmap before filming this video, but this is forever changing. I think that's just the life of O365. I think if you're watching this video 5 years from now, most of the stuff I talked about is going to probably be obsolete or look totally different. 5 years is probably a lifetime. I even give it 2 years or maybe in a year, right? In 12 months is a lot of new features could be out here. This may look a little bit different, so on and so forth, but that's the life that we live in, forever changing. Okay, so that's it for OneDrive. I'll see you in the next episode. Take care.